I'm Bill O'Donnell, and welcome to another program on spirituality. Today in the studio, I have a delightful experience to share with you with my old friend Ross Bishop, who is a shaman, and was going to have a lot to share with us about that. So for my fundamentalist friends, I recommend you change the channel. I don't want to upset you in any way, but I think if you stick around, you're going to find it pretty interesting. Ross is the author of this new book called Truth, which I found to be fascinating, and I would encourage people to read it. I would also encourage people to read these books first, maybe help you get squared away and balanced. But after that, if you feel a little adventurous, this book is extraordinary. There's some wonderful stuff in it, and I'm pleased to have Ross Bishop as my guest. Welcome, Ross.
Thanks, Bill. It's wonderful to be here.
Yeah, we were trying to figure out last night at his going away party when we actually met, and we both think it's a little over 20 years ago, shortly after we both came to Santa Fe or moved here, and haven't had a chance to spend too much time together, but I've enjoyed hearing about his exploits and things that he has learned personally in his journey. And I think that's the important thing here is, you know, he can demonstrate by his own life experience how to pursue your own spiritual life, and I think he offers great experience with that. So welcome, Ross.
Thank you, Bill.
Ross is a shaman. We haven't had a shaman on the show before, so would you take this opportunity to share with people what a shaman is and how it relates to spirituality?
Okay. In the West, when we look at someone's behavior, we will look at what they do and the decisions they make and pretty much say, you know, you're responsible for what you do. You're the captain of your ship. When a shaman looks at that same behavior, he will look for the dark influences, we'll call them the shadow influences, that push a person to act in ways that are not in harmony with their natural selves. And so what we do with people in helping them to deal with their issues and their problems is to help them focus on those darker influences that are pushing them in ways that they may not want. And so there's a whole 40,000-year history of ritual and ceremony around which, in various cultures, people deal with those dark influences, shadow influences.
Yeah. Well, I know from my own experience in the path, on the Roman Catholic path, my confessor on Saturday gets to hear about the dark influences in my life, and it's true that we need help in that area.
Well, we do. Those are powerful influences. I think the difference for me, and what really makes a difference in my work, is that instead of focusing everything on it's your responsibility and it's your fault, you know, you still are accountable for what you do, but you also realize that there's a whole panoply of things out here that are influencing you that don't come to the surface in sort of, let's say, Western psychology or in our normal view of things. And it helps people to kind of understand why they do what they do. And so that's the power for me in this.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. I mean, there are many things. I'm reminded of the New Testament reference, I think, from St. Paul when he says, I do the things I don't want to do, and I don't do the things that I want to do. And then the old biblical references throughout where the devil is influencing you, whether in fact or in fiction. The point is you still feel that and you get those influences, and they do have a negative effect, don't they?
They do. And if you remember Flip Wilson from the old days of television, you know, the devil made me do it.
Yeah,
okay. Well, that's
great.
I mean, that's an extension of that kind of thinking.
Yeah. Better to have a sense of humor about it than get too caught up.
Oh, yeah.
I once had an interview we taped a piece at the Benedictine Monastery in Pecos. He was the head exorcist from the Archdiocese of New York, and I can't think of James LeVar, I think his name was. In any case, I mean, he told some chilling stories firsthand of experience. So these influences are in the world, and you appear to be part of that group that helps people in processing their own stuff.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that for me, would you?
Well, I mean, and you use the word influence, and I think that's really appropriate. There are, and we can get into, you know, how this whole structures out, but each of us has, because of our own wounding process, a vulnerability to beings, energies, influences, whatever you want to call them, that are around us, that are in the universe, who would seek to cause us to do things, as I said before, that are not in our natural way of being things. You know, our natural response to life is a place of love and compassion and caring. And these forces would encourage us to move away from that, to be selfish, to be unkind, to be cruel. And they, in the history of mankind, have pushed people to do some really horrible, horrible things. So they are, how shall I say, they do not have power in themselves, but their power to influence in man's history has been just profound.
Yeah. Talk a little more about that, because I don't think people hear enough about it. We're not talking about fire and brimstone here. We're talking about how to help people get through these things.
Well, maybe if I back off a bit and talk about how it starts, because it's important in understanding the structure of the thing, I think. When a child is wounded, and that's, when a child is in an environment where the love that they need isn't present, the child doesn't have the coping skills to sit down and say, well, dad's an alcoholic or mom has repressed sexual issues, so I'm not getting the love that I need. All that kid knows is I hurt. And in that instant, if you will, a being will come and say, look, they don't love you. I will protect you. And the protection that being offers is to separate the kid away from life in some way or other. It may be to cause the child to not remember what's happened to him or her, cause them to rationalize away events, cause them to see life in some different way, and maybe most importantly, to not participate in life anymore so that the kid isn't vulnerable. So what you've got now is a 30-year-old who is trying to deal with the world from a place of wounding and who is being strongly influenced by these forces who, interestingly enough, really aren't trying to create evil, as I think has been sort of historically characterized, but are really working to try and isolate this child from further harm. So in a sense, they're really trying to be helpful. But the net effect is they keep the kid away from the world, they keep us in a place of fear, in a place of anxiety, in a place of anger. And of course, the effect of that on the larger society then is all of this negative behavior that we see around us. So what we help people to do is to understand where this came from, to help them to see, if you look back at my example of the child, this wasn't his or her fault. This was because of the environment that the kid was in. So we help people to see where this came from, that they didn't really create it. And this is, I think, the really important part, they have the opportunity to let it go if they want to. That's a big step for people, but that's what shaman, if you will, help people to do.
Help people understand the difference. I mean, most people in the Western world are thinking in terms of going to psychiatrist or psychologist. Distinguish for us, if you will, the difference between those kind of services and what you do, or what a shaman does.
That's a good question. And I spent a lot of years in therapy before I became a shaman. And the reason that I think the biggest reason I became shaman was to try and understand what was driving me at a deeper level. As much as I think, and I don't want to badmouth psychology, because there are lots of wonderful therapists and they do lots of great work. It didn't take me deep enough into the roots and origins of what was driving my life. And so I kept looking for more, I kept looking for answers, and that is in fact what drove me to become shaman, plus the fact that I was hurting and wasn't finding answers to what I needed.
Which is an important point.
Yeah.
Probably the driving force, isn't it?
It really is. I didn't sit down with a bunch of career videos and say, look, the shaman thing looks good. I think I'm going to do that. You go here because it is the place that gives you answers to those painful questions that just, root around inside of you.
Well, keep going, because it's a great story. I asked you to interrupt you about the difference between psychiatry and psychology, and being a shaman. How you got there?
Okay. Well, let me segue out in two parts. If I only look at your behavior, and we only work with the way you act and how you think and how you feel and those kinds of things, we can do some important work. But we don't get to what's really driving you, and that goes back to these shadow forces that I speak of, okay? Mm-hmm. So that, for me, is what's missing in contemporary Western psychology. It doesn't address those things. It's like, psychology will say, let me help you to be a better person, let me help you to behave better, but it doesn't disconnect what drives you from those darker regions. And that's the difference for me between shamanism and most other forms of healing. Okay. My route was growing up in a very, very difficult family situation, a lot of pain. And you know, I can remember as a small child walking around going, what did I do? You know, what was wrong with me that God had to treat me in this way? And I can also remember sitting, my mom was very religious, and so she encouraged me to go to Sunday school. And I can remember sitting there, and you know, somebody up there would be talking about Jesus loves you and God loves you, you know, and all that kind of stuff. And I'm sitting there, you know, 7, 8 years old saying, maybe for all these other kids, but not for me.
Because of your experience.
Yeah. And so then those attitudes, those beliefs, those behaviors, you know, they carry now 30, 35 years later. And I'm still struggling with this, why is life so hard? Why is life so painful? Why is life so difficult? I'm trying to lead a fairly conventional corporate life, as you know, you and I've talked, and it just wasn't working. I'm making more money than whatever, and I'm miserable. And so there was that push, and I think it does come from the pain, to look for answers, to say, okay, I got to find some explanation. I've got to find some deeper meaning for why my life is the way that it is. And for me, then, taking after the spiritual exploration has allowed me the opportunity to find my answers. So,
yeah, well, that's important. I think that's what we all have to do. I mean, Jesus also said in the New Testament, he says, before you're going to find, you got to seek. Before you're going to have it open to you, you've got to knock. Yeah. And before you're going to receive, you've got to ask. And he says also, pick up your cross. Everybody has a cross, and follow me. Now, all these are metaphors and symbolisms, but it certainly describes what you're telling me now.
It is, and I think what doesn't get said a lot in that, and I can understand why, is that before you do any of that, you're going to hurt. Mm-hmm. And, you know, when they asked Buddha the meaning of life, you know, the Buddha said life is pain. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really what he was talking about, is that, you know, we're in this place and we get ourselves out of harmony and we do things that aren't in, as I said before, our natural selves. And so what happens then is we end up hurting. And then there's an opportunity, there's this wonderful gift in that moment to say, okay, you know, I'm hurting over here. What did I do? What in my thinking, what in my beliefs, what in my attitudes caused me to get out of harmony? And now I hurt, so that next time I won't do that again.
Right. Listen, if you've just joined us, we're talking to Shaman Ross Bishop, the author of this new book, Truth, which I can strongly recommend and hope to talk about a little more. Also want to drive you to his website, which is www.rossbishop.com. There's some wonderful excerpts there. He has some wonderful writings, and I wouldn't hesitate to recommend you go ahead and take a look at those, and they'll be in the credits at the end as well. So this is your second book. You wrote, the first book was on the shadow. What was the title of that book?
The title of the book is Healing the Shadow.
Healing the Shadow.
And that goes into what you and I have been talking about going in and looking at your dark side and dealing with those issues.
Yeah. I was exposed to some of those shadow issues at the Benedictine Monastery in Pecos at their School for Spiritual Directors, talking about Jung and all those people and Jungian centers looking into dreams and the rest of it. Because how we really approach this is important, because most people, unfortunately, are going in the other direction. They're self-medicating with alcohol and tobacco and nicotine and drugs, and they're not dealing with the problem, then it doesn't go away, does it?
No, and you know, ours is a society that doesn't encourage people to go deeper. You know, our whole attitude is do what you need to do to take care of your pain. You know, whether that's go to the doctor and get some drugs, you know, or to go party all night long and forget. You know, and there's a place for both of those under the right circumstances. But, you know, in the old days, if you will, in more ancient cultures, there was a lot of emphasis placed on, hey, if you're hurting, look at why, look at what's going on. We don't do that very much in this culture. And it's sad. And I think,
why don't we do it, Ross?
Well, largely for me, it's because 400 or 500 years ago, the scientific community had suffered badly under the repression from the spiritual folks, the church folks. Yeah. And they felt it was necessary for their survival to strip spirituality out of society. I was at a dance up in Taos Pueblo not long ago, a Native American dance. And I'm with a couple of my Native friends, and I'm standing there watching this wonderful dance in front of me, and I'm saying to myself, you know, I'm a Native person too. Only my traditions and my beliefs have been buried by a jealous church and a jealous government and all those kinds of things that took those, in my case, European cultural traditions and made sure that they were buried. And for me, a big part of those traditions was learning to grow from your own pain, learning to take the opportunity that life presents and gain from it, not just suffer from it. And I think because we don't have much spirituality in our lives anymore, we are paying a huge price for it.
Huge. I'm reminded of the late Pope John Paul II, who asked for forgiveness for a lot of the unfortunate things that happened in the history of the Roman Catholic Church. And I think that was necessary for us to move forward, that we can really have this discussion and not be so possessed by our negative history, where the religiosity of the time was so strident that they missed opportunities to enrich themselves and the church by things that were available to them. And I think we're now, and I think your book is also maybe part of that new trend in some way to start, what can we learn from other sources?
Well, and I really appreciated what he did with that, because what he said was, look, you know, we're a big organization. We were in control of the world for a very long time. We made mistakes. We did things wrong. And I think until you can do that, you deprive yourself of the opportunity to grow. And so I thought that was a wonderfully healthy and enervating thing to do for the church.
Yeah. Well, I confess my own background. I was out of the church for many years, and it was a Jewish teacher going Hindu, who you mentioned here, Ram Dass,
Yeah.
who's in this book, and who inspired me to, wait a minute, in psychology, he was a high priest of psychology, clinical
Yes.
professor, head of the department at Harvard.
Yeah.
And Tim Leary comes and say, look, I've just learned more on 8 hours of a psychosyllabic substance, or some substance, that hallucinogenic substance, than he had in 12 years of psychotherapy. And they went off to research it, and came this book of his spiritual path, then later meeting all these Hindu teachers that came to the West and inspired a lot of people. I was in an ashram myself where 4 out of 5 of us were either Jews or Catholics. You know, that's statistically significant, looking for more. In my case, then I was led to the Benedictine monastery in Pecos, where I got grounded in Roman Catholicism in a positive way.
Yeah.
But how many people have that opportunity to really seek or to go past their pain?
I think the tragedy, if you will, is that many people have to get pushed so far. They have to get pushed into so much pain that they finally will go down that. They'll find some way to get there. And we don't provide an easy opportunity for them to go. I mean, I've dealt with a great many, for example, drug addicts and alcoholics in my private practice. And, you know, society, just structurally, we make those people go through hell before we really give them the opportunity to heal. And it would be wonderful. And I'll go back to the tribal people that I studied with when I learned to be a shaman. You know, there you have this whole culture that exists on the principle of, you know, somebody over here is hurting. Let's find a way to help them. Let's get there and give them the community support and the love that person needs, so that they can come back into the fold. We don't do that. We basically ignore these people. We take our mentally ill people today. We send them out in the street. We would rather put criminals in prison and spend huge amounts of the national budget rather than help them. And I think it's fully 2/3 of the people today that are in prison for drug offenses. Well, the truth is, a drug abuse issue is an emotional issue. You know, it's not about some genetic defect that says I'm criminal and therefore I must be locked away from society. This is somebody who needs help. But we don't have the wherewithal or the wisdom to give them the opportunity out that they need. We lock them up and make them worse.
Yeah, you're so true. And the book also talks about, go on from there, Ross, and what you talked about in terms of also physical illness and what some of the major causes of physical illness, all these people who are dying of cancer and heart disease arrest. Talk about that a little bit.
There's a connection where you go from a psychic disturbance to an emotional disturbance that then will manifest in the physical realm. I mean, if I'm here and I get upset, there will be a great many physical disturbances in my body from being upset. Okay, so where you have a lifelong pattern of doing that, you will end up with heart disease or cancer or arthritis or any number of other things in my belief system. Okay.
You're not alone in that, though.
Well, I understand, but I mean, I want to say very clearly that Western medicine doesn't necessarily agree with that, although I think there are changes occurring there too. But my point is, we get in and work with the psychic disturbances, we work with the emotional disturbances, and what we see then is we begin to see the changes in the physical body. And I think that's a wonderful opportunity. I was just with John of God down in Brazil and had the opportunity to see what happens for people when someone goes in and heals them at that strict physical level. And then we begin to bubble back up. And there were a number of people, I was kind of surprised by this actually, there were a number of people there who couldn't handle the change, who were so threatened by the fact that suddenly they were going to be healed and going to feel better, they actually had to shut the process down. So for me, it's just a matter of where you start, but unless you provide that psychological and psychic underpinning for the healing process, it's just going to move someplace else. Right. And we've seen this repeatedly.
Yeah, so even if they took the steps of going all the way to Brazil and to have this experience, I've seen a lot of healing take place at the Benedictine Monastery in Pecos. There's any number of cases where people would make the effort to come, hey, I'm looking for help, I'm hurting, and then they would pray over them and spontaneous healings would take place. And yet there is resistance. Can you talk a little bit about that? What do we need to know to overcome our own resistance? I mean, you went through this in your own life.
Oh, very much so. And, I'll say this, from my own experience, I had to basically be broken down by the pain of my life. And I don't recommend that process for anybody. But that's what a lot of people do. Fundamentally, we're afraid to deal with what's inside. I'm amazed. This is a little thing I do when I travel and do workshops. I'll ask the room, how many of you feel unworthy? And it's like, 97%. I mean, it's amazing to me because, I'm just sitting there with this fairly random selected group of a couple hundred people, and everybody in that room feels unworthy. Okay. So if you are confronted with this feeling and life says, well, let's go ask God whether or not he loves you. And the dominant inner feeling here is, no, he's going to say no. Then what am I going to do? And I think it's a huge dilemma for almost everybody. And it's also the crux of why, in my belief, we are here. Because it brings us face to face with our own God-selfness. And it's that road that we are all going to go down eventually. And so what I'm really trying to do in all this work that I do is to help people to do it now when they have choice and when it's a little easier than later.
Yeah. I was fascinated in reading Ross's new book, Truth, some of the stories in here of people that you've worked with and that you know. You talk about that road we're all going to go down. We're all going to go down the road of death. And one of the near-death experience in here was phenomenal, and the stuff that's reported back. As we tape this, I just want to honor someone I'm sure you'll agree with. Last week, it was reported that Kubler-Ross passed away, who was a pioneer in some of the death and dying work, and I wanted to honor her memory. But some of the stories we've heard from her work of people she's talked to who have clinically died and come back, and some of the validation from our great religious traditions were given to them. Yeah. And I get a chill just as I think about these things, because on the positive side, our major religions are working. They are doing positive things for people, and they're great inspirations. But maybe on their weaker sides, they may not be able to reach those areas within each individual to get the help that they need. There seems to be a separation of church and state. There also seems to be a separation from church and healthcare providers or people who are there to help us in our life, which is a spiritual journey by definition, why we have this show. Spirituality TV is dedicated to people to encourage them in their spiritual life, but that also means right here and now in this body.
That's a really good point, and I want to say to everybody out there, please let the world know how much you appreciate and support what this man does, because it's important stuff. Bill and I were talking, I think it was last evening. When I sit down to talk with a really accomplished Islamic priest or a Catholic bishop or a Jewish rabbi, we're talking the same language. I mean, we are all doing, in essence, the same work. A little different language, a little different approach, but fundamentally, there's not a lot of difference. But as it gets down towards the street, we get individual egos involved, we get individual fears involved, people get protective of their turf and that kind of thing. And that's where the street religions, I think, do become different. Mm-hmm. So you end up with Islamic terrorism, for example, and that kind of thing, which is so contrary to, for example, the teachings of Islam.
Right.
And so that's what happens, I think. So as long as we can stay with, what's really in this book, what's really being taught, we're fine.
Yeah. Well, we've got to translate this, for ourselves, and there are great translations of the Bible and the Catechism. The Catechords are helpful, but I want to add your book to this mix, Ross. This book, Truth, was really a good book. I was inspired by it.
Thank you.
There's some stuff here that goes beyond traditional thinking, but I think it's time for us to start looking. And Jesus said, "Greater things you will do than I have done," and we have to embrace what we have and to seek, knock, and ask, and to find that within ourselves. Listen, we only got a couple minutes left. I want to give it to you. If anything you want to say to the camera, the people out there, to encourage them, please do so.
I think the only real thing I would say to anyone is listen to your heart. There is this marvelous mechanism within you that God put there for you to help you to learn and to grow. And it's when you stop listening to your heart that we get in trouble. So I would say to all of you who are out there, if you're hurting, look at what it is that the universe or God or however you want to, whatever fits your particular theology, look at what the universe is asking you to change. Because if you're hurting, I will tell you that it's because in some way or other you're out of harmony with the universe. So look at what God or the universe is offering you in terms of your own growth. Take that opportunity and then grow from that pain so that you don't have to repeat it. And that's coming from somebody who was really good at not listening, years ago. So I've learned that one the hard way. Bill, I want to say thank you for allowing me to be here. It was a pleasure.
My pleasure. Well, thank you for writing this book and for being a resource on the planet and expanding from your Christian roots into areas that we can all benefit from, and that's how I see it. So we want to encourage you at home. If anything that Ross has said inspires you, I would encourage you, go to his website, www.rossbishop.com, and take a look for yourself at some of his readings. You can also get his book through there. Blue Lotus Press is his publishing company, and you can get it directly from them, and I encourage you to do so. Just in a few seconds left, I want to thank you for coming, and good luck in your new venture moving to Virginia. We're going to miss you here, but I know you're going to come back. So we want to thank you for viewing. Also want to thank our director, Marshall, our tech support, George, and our camera people, Tom and Wendy. And also want to thank our people that support this this ministry and this program. Watch their names in the credit and give them a call or see if you can do some work with them. And we encourage your support in this. So again, for everybody here, for Ross and myself and everybody at Spirituality TV, I want to thank you for viewing, and stay tuned next time for another program on spirituality.